first time at Drucker. Thanks to Richard for inviting me to be part of this really very thoughtful event. I should say thanks twice, because I looked at the draft program and this was the event this was the panel I really wanted to look after. Should managers be activists is our question. We have 75 minutes to take it apart. And managerial activists, of course, are very, very well known to us. Paul Polman from Unilever is on this stage tomorrow after announcing his retirement today. These are the guys that stand out from the crowd. They reject the short term in favor of purpose plus profit over the long term. But the shareholder activists that would turn that strategy on its head have become very seductive marketers. They're not alone. Peter Drucker famously wrote, "There is one valid definition of a business purpose: to create a customer. Only now the customers are making demands of business over and above the products and services they deliver. And then there are the demands of the workers and board colleagues, all amplified by technology and the crowd. So what sort of activism should prevail?" To discuss this topic, we have a premium panel. The biogs are all in the book, so I won't go through them, but very briefly, from the far left, Nicolas Colin, who's co-founder and director of The Family, which is a pan-European firm that provides a platform for entrepreneurs to operate and scale. He's also adjunct professor at the Sciences Po School of Public Affairs in Paris. Secondly, Peter Oswald, Chief Executive of Mondi Group, the FTSE 100 paper and packaging company headquartered here in Vienna. Thirdly, Henry Mintzburg, who's the Cleghorn Professor of Management Studies, Strategy and Organization at the Desautels Faculty of Management, McGill University in Montreal. And then Emmanuelle Duez, who's a serial entrepreneur. She's the president of Women Up and founder of the Boson Project, which is a firm that puts human capital at the heart of organizational transformation, essentially helping companies be more activist. And finally, Philip Kotler, who's the S.C. Johnson and Son Professor of International Marketing at the Kellogg School of Management, Northwestern University, who's written widely on marketing and consulted for a number of blue chips, including IBM, General Electric, and Bank of America on their marketing strategy. And to kick us off, I will hand over to Philip to give us his thoughts on the topic. Thanks very much.
James, thank you very much for the introduction. And it's wonderful that you're still here. It's been a wonderful, rich day, and the fact you're here for more is wonderful. I'm going to just take the 9 minutes I'm allocated to make some points about companies should be activistic or active. In politically active, no, but socially active. And I want to say, here's the reason. Societies are facing a great number of problems. You know the problems. Those problems are usually to be solved by government. However, many governments are underfunded. They're into gridlock. They can't get anything done. We had depended on government to address problems of hunger and disease and things like that, but they're not doing it. The only real engine we could depend on is business. And yet business has the purpose of being profitable. So the real question is, can a business be both profitable and social? And I believe we could make a case for that they can do both. They could do well and do good. So I'll make a second point, and that is, it is not enough for business to be charitable. I'm happy they're charitable, but it's not enough. Maybe that's maybe that's done for your conscience. You give money away for good causes, but that isn't really connecting with a cause. Really saying this is our cause. For example, there's the well-known company called Avon. Avon, their customers are women, by and large. And they said a problem facing women, one of several, is breast cancer. And they have done marvelous work, not only in raising money for this problem, for its treatment and its cure. So basically, that's an example of a company that wants to be social as well as profitable. Two people have made strong statements about this idea. One of them is the head of the Reputation Institute. Maybe you didn't know that there is an institute that studies how companies make a reputation, for good or bad. And this gentleman, Stephen Griffith, said, "It's not enough to just have a high-quality product and deliver results on Wall Street. Social activism, aligning with communities, what you do to make the world a better place, that's the metric." The second statement was stated recently by Larry Fink, who heads the BlackRock Group. BlackRock is probably one of the biggest hedge funds around. And he shocked the world, he shocked the financial world with this statement: "Society is demanding companies, both public and private, to serve a social purpose. To prosper over time, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also how it makes a positive contribution to society." Can you imagine being asked, if you're the CEO of a company, a very stark question: in what way does your company contribute to society? The CEO will probably talk about the car we make is a good car and people have transportation and so on. But really, have you thought about whether your company really contributes to society? I'll name some companies that do. I'm impressed with Starbucks and the way it's run. And he's worried about paper cups. Well, they weren't paper cups, they were plastic cups, filling up our oceans. And Howard Schultz figured we've got to solve that problem because we want good, strong oceans to exist and so on. I would say Unilever, where Paul Pullman said his job is to do the best he can for the climate and the environment and still grow. That his company is going to have the ability to reach good growth objectives and also do good. I would just add Patagonia, Body Shop, Nike, and so on. So the issue is, should a brand take a stand? And I'm going to argue that a brand should take a stand. But what stand? There's a thing I might call regressive activism, where the company says we're in favor of guns. People should have a right to own guns. And I guess it's a judgment on my part to say that is a regressive cause. We are interested in this idea of finding a progressive cause. So basically, I'm going to leave you with these 5 questions. Think about your company. Has your company ever been a brand activist? If so, with what social problem? Do you have a social problem you're concerned with? 2, if your company has not been a brand activist, would you recommend to your company to become a brand activist? In which problem, social problem? 3, what could be the rewards from the activist position your brand takes? By the way, one reward is you'll find it easier to attract good millennials. Millennials want purpose to their lives, and they will respond to a company that gives them purpose. 4, what if many customers don't share the company's values? Yeah, here you've chosen a cause. How many customers are you going to lose? How many are you going to gain? What if your employees, this is the last question, why would you have adopted a cause that your employees are not? Some employees may not be happy with the cause. So I leave you with this question about, should you become brand activist, and with what cause, or just stay neutral, just be an engine for economic growth, but not a social improvement. Thank you very much.
Philip, just one question before we move on. The companies that you cite, the good examples that you give, do you think they enjoy financial success because of the brand activism or in spite of it?
I couldn't hear your...
Do you think the companies that you cite, do you think they're enjoying financial success because of the brand activism or in spite of it?
You know, cause and effect is a difficult question. I had never thought about that. Maybe Henry, who knows the answer to almost everything, will get to that.
Sure.
I said almost.
Over to you, Henry. I will follow up with him.
Okay, unaccustomed as I am. So, should managers be activists? The question sounds almost rhetorical. How can managers not be activists? They have to be activists in their business to make things better. They have to be activists in their social responsibility, and so on. So managing is activism. You can't get away from that. But I say almost because there can be too much activism, and too much activism in various ways. I'll start internally over what we might call over-activism within the company. Of course, the obvious thing is micromanaging, right? Where managers interfere and meddle, and nobody wants that. Managers who buy the leadership hype that somehow chief executive is the be-all and end-all managing can be overactive in the sense that they expect to be doing everything. And that's not healthy for any organization. As I said yesterday in another, it would be interesting to drop the word leadership in this conference and see where we end up. Could be quite interesting. If a bell went off, like a buzzer went off, every time somebody used the word leadership, it could be interesting. What we have too much of, I've got a new book coming out called Bedtime Stories for Managers, and the subtitle is Farewell to Lofty Leadership, Welcome Engaging Management. And engaging management is not micromanaging. Engaging management is simply on the ground knowing what's going on. This idea that we have top management, it's just a metaphor, and it's a silly metaphor. No company uses the word bottom management. Well, I think if they don't use the word bottom management, they should be forbidden from using the word top management, because it's just as much a metaphor. So think about that. To use a line I like to use every day, all the time, an effective organization is a community of human beings. It's not a collection of human resources. So we need to get away from that. Now, that's internally. And externally, I want to make 2 points about managers as activists. The first is that managers in business who think that what they do is the one best way and get involved on, say, the boards or whatever, or get hired to run hospitals and government departments and other endangered species are destructive. Because hospitals and governments are very different kinds of animals. And the one best way of business is not the one best way for these other organizations, but it's not so much of it is also not the one best way for business itself anymore. We've got too much disconnected management or lofty leadership. When we call it leadership and pretend that somehow management is inferior to leadership, we're in trouble. Nobody wants to be led by somebody who doesn't manage, and nobody should want to be managed by somebody who doesn't lead. So those two things are part and parcel of the same thing. But the other aspect of activism is the external, or the other external aspect of activism is the relationship with society and taking corporate social responsibility too far. There's no line between corporate social responsibility and corporate social irresponsibility. We need to be talking about CRI just as much as we're talking about CRS. What is it? Corporate social? CSR or CSI, corporate social irresponsibility. And corporate social irresponsibility is meddling in the affairs of the state or meddling in other aspects of society that carry business activity beyond where it should be. Now, at least 2 people in the conference have seriously insulted me in the last day or 2 by saying, gee, you sound just like Milton Friedman. They never thought of myself that way, but that the responsibility of business is business and stay out of other things. Well, I have a question for Milton Friedman, who of course is not here to answer it, so easier to ask him that. But if a corporation interferes, if a pharmaceutical company gets deeply involved or a national or a rifle company gets deeply involved in lobbying Congress in the United States in order to increase shareholder value, I guess Milton Friedman would have to say that that's running their business. But of course, I wouldn't accept that, and most of us, most of us do accept it. It's a given that that corporations these days, many of them, too many of them, meddle deeply in politics. Especially in the United States, to the point where, as I argue in a book called Rebalancing Society, societies are completely out of balance these days, starting with the United States. They're out of balance on the side of the private sector just as much as they're out of balance, just as much as the Eastern European communist countries were out of balance on the side of the public sector. Same problem, different sector. And that's a result of activism, and I'm not too keen on that kind of activism. There's too much of that kind of activism. Business belongs in its place, which is the marketplace, so that the other places can be left open for what governments and communities have to do, which is play a major role in our lives and in society and in how things work. So if a CEO says to me, how can I be more responsible? I say, get out of our government. Our government in the sense that it's my government and it's his government or her government, but it's not the company's government and it's not his or her money's government. And this is what's distorting society today. Far too much activism. So to close, I'll be right on time, I collect, some people collect iron. I have friends who collect irons. They have hundreds of irons all over their house. Well, I collect adjectival capitalism phrases that describe what I call adjectival capitalism. So here goes. Breakthrough capitalism, caring capitalism, conscious capitalism, inclusive capitalism, regenerative capitalism, sustainable capitalism, and democratic capitalism. I like the last one because capitalism is the noun and democracy is the adjective. At least they got their priorities right for them. So there's a line in Pygmalion that says, methinks the lady doth protest too much. Well, methinks that the capitalist doth propose too much. Thank you. No, it's better that way. I don't get the echo. I can hear you better that way.
How do you draw a line between the social activism and the political activism?
Well, that's the fun. Well, I'm not, social. Close it. I'll repeat the question. How do you draw the line between social and political activism?
The question is, how do you turn on the microphone?
Yeah.
The question is, you say there's too much activism, and then you were keen on this, the dividing line between social activism and political, and I just wonder who is the arbiter? Where do you draw the line?
Well, it's not an easy line to draw, but I would draw the line in terms of out of the marketplace, where a company competes, it can do wonderful social things. It can pollute less, it can build windmills, it can do all kinds of other things that are socially responsible and socially helpful. Where business starts to get into politics or get into how society should be managed, including going into the boards of hospitals and saying, I know better how to run this place, then they've crossed the line.
I'll come to Emmanuelle in a second, but one question on Slido for you, Henry. How do managers police you talked about CSI corporate social irresponsibility? I mean, are you advocating more whistleblowers?
Absolutely. I mean, sure. And more recognition. I mean, look, let me be honest, and some people won't like this, but pharmaceutical companies in many countries are allowed to price so that people die for want of medicine that could be both affordable and profitable, just not obscenely profitable. A patent is a patent is a monopoly granted by the government. The government has an obligation to watch those patents, and in some countries they do, but almost in no countries do they do that properly. It's one of 100 examples of how we've gone completely over. I mean, rifle manufacturers is the obvious example in the US, but it's another example. Last comment, the Supreme Court of America, in a decision called Citizens United, legalized bribery. Bribery is legal in America today. That is, you can donate to your heart's content to political parties. It is destroying democracy in the United States, and it's harming democracy in many other places.
Emmanuelle, would you move on to you, please?
To address the subject of activist organization, I would like to start with a short story. I am on the board of a major French company, a family business of 100,000 employees. A few months ago, the board, the new management, and the shareholders got together to discuss the following question: is Amazon a friend or a foe? 4 years ago, Amazon was not in our radar. But since then, Amazon has become our main competitor, with a platform value proposition very different from the retail in-store value proposition of the company I'm talking about, and with an American-like culture of bulldozer processes, very different from those of the French, who have a more paternalist culture, which is rounder, softer, slower, more human, sometimes too human. After a deep reflection, after a deep introspection, they asked themselves 4 questions that were crucial for their survival. Is it possible to imagine a system of value creation and thus of performance that restores human capital as a central focus? Yes. Is it possible to go to war using very different weapons and most of all, a different philosophy and ethic regarding entrepreneurship and business? Yes. Is it possible to become an activist in a new way when you are struggling as a paternalist, traditional retail company? Yes. And finally, do we still have the time to dream of other models of performance and growth? Yes. This meeting led to a radical choice. They decided not to compete with Amazon on Amazon's own terms. Where Amazon wields the weapons of technology and processes, they decided to leverage their human capital. They are gambling that it will be their people who will make the difference, who will win clients over. They profoundly believe that another model of capitalism is possible, and they are working to create it. This corporate activism as a whole, not only of the brand or the managers, but also of the shareholders, of the board, is the kind of activism I would like to talk about. An activism that requires a humanist ethic and the courage to reinvent capitalism. I believe in this corporate activism for the future. So to me, the question is not, should organizations be activists in society, but do they have the luxury of not being activists in society? And I think they don't. The first reason is that the people relationship to works have changed. In a postmodern and apocalyptic world where 60% of the vertebrates have disappeared, and where we hear that we have 4 to 12 years to reverse the trend before it's too late. Now, more than ever, committing to companies has to make sense. And committing to companies that have no superior purpose makes absolutely no sense. And what is the situation of commitment today within companies? Gallup polls and other surveys show quite clearly largely disengaged social bodies all over the world. Thinking I don't care, it's just a job is not acceptable anymore in a world which needs rebuilding, where companies must play a major role. This lack of engagement that harms the necessary transformation of most companies today could be solved by making a turn towards activism, which can supply purpose, values, and impact. Commitment and activism are linked. The people inside the companies understand more and more that bringing or not bringing their energy, their values, their talents to a company, especially in the context of war for talent, is shaping or choosing the world of tomorrow. And this also goes in both ways. Tell me which company you are working for, and I will know what kind of human you are. As Philippe said, this is particularly true for millennials. The second reason is that people outside companies have changed too. Thanks to the extraordinary digital revolution, the current generation of consumers know perfectly well that they have power in their hands. Boycott, email campaign, they are counterpowers, aware, informed, and sometimes uncompromising. Consequently, companies must transcend their economic purpose, offering a transparent and augmented value proposition which is aligned between consumers and employees. What implicit contracts am I signing if I buy that product from that company? Be careful. Company will no longer be counted with a corporate social responsibility, the traditional one. They want a company that puts its money where its mouth is, that applies to its human capital the values it claims to uphold. Consumers are progressively developing an ethic of consumption, and they will expect firms regarding ethic of production. It's just the beginning of the movement, but we already can see such a trend in the luxury sector, with major brands obliged to state the origin of their leather and the way they treat people inside the tannery and the animals too. Traceability is a new luxury, and this is an activist posture. Thirdly, we observe that people inside and outside of these companies are actually one and the same, sociologically speaking. And maybe in the future they will cooperate to force companies to change. This is what whistleblowers are. Whistleblowers are employees who take seriously their responsibilities to consumers as the primary guardians of ethics. Pierre Reverdy, a French poet, gave a wonderful definition of ethics, aesthetics from the inside. The key idea there and the key challenge for companies is a notion of alignment between the inside and the outside, between consumers and employees, between purpose and reality, between the product and the process. So should companies be activists? Without any doubt, yes. The companies that will win the war for talent and clients will commit themselves to activism for real, beyond the traditional borders of capitalism, by reinventing both the raison d'être and modus operandi of organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuelle. So if the activism is bubbling up from the younger generation, the younger consumers, do you think the managers wouldn't be, unless they had to be? I mean, they're being told by their workers and their customers. It's very much a sort of bottom-up revolution, if you like.
For the young generation?
Yeah.
Yes, I think the young generation is bring a message of hope on this subject. They are the managers and the leaders of tomorrow. And when we study very precisely the psychological deal they have with the companies, we can see it's evolving a lot. For baby boomers, for instance, the deal was, I give you my commitment, I engaged, but I want security, I want psychological and material security in exchange. For the X generation, the deal is, okay, I will engage myself, I will commit, but in exchange, I want employability. For the new generation, for the millennials, the Gen Y, the Gen Z, etc., you have a context very different. You have a situation of competencies obsolescence, and you have the job insecurity everywhere. And so they are looking for a place to blossom. And they have a kind of identity relationships to company. This is the reason why you have a link between activism and commitment. And in a context of crisis of commitment within companies, I think companies don't have the choice to move on this subject. And people today, millennials, are just workers, employees, but tomorrow they will be the leaders of our companies.
Okay, thank you very much. Move on now to Nicolas Colin, some perspective on activism, particularly in the tech world.
Sure. So when my two business partners and I founded the family, my firm, 5 years ago, we had this very odd idea that growing a successful startup in Europe very much resembled running for president in the US. It's because there are striking resemblances between growing a startup and running for president. It all begins with doing things that don't scale in New Hampshire and Iowa. Then you need to find your early adopters with the first version of your product. Then you need to raise a lot of money to scale up at the scale of an entire nation in consecutive rounds. Then you need to execute very fast until election day. And if you win the election, it's like when a startup finally discovers its business model. It ceases to be a startup, following Steve Blank's definition of a startup, to become a company. And when a campaign leads to winning an election, it's time to govern and to face a new kind of challenges. And so we modeled our approach to investing on that idea, and we decided that our job as investors was about educating our founders and teaching them to be even more ambitious, to be driven by a mission, and to take very bold risks along the way. In other words, we teach them to be activists. Then I realized, studying tech companies and the nature of digital markets, that being an activist is not only a marketing trick. It's actually rooted in a very important microeconomic feature that explains most of the digital economy today. So it's nothing new. You've been hearing that a lot. We're going through a paradigm shift, and we're leaving the Fordist economy of the 20th century to enter the digital economy, or what I call the entrepreneurial age of the 21st century. And this entrepreneurial age is explained by the rise of two general purpose technologies, which are computing and networks. So there's more and more computing power in the world. There is computing power in personal computers, in smartphones, but more and more in every device. Computing is becoming ubiquitous. Also, individuals all over the world are more and more connected with one another through vast networks as they're using the same applications every day. And so it makes it possible for companies to orchestrate interactions between individuals. It makes it possible to collect vast amounts of personal data, and it makes it possible to harness the power that is vested in those billions of individuals that are using networked applications on a day-to-day basis. And in that world dominated by computing and networks, there's a very important feature that explains competition on digital markets, and that is increasing returns to scale. Increasing returns to scale is when a company is racing ahead of its competitors which eventually leads through powerful feedback loops to seizing most of the market in what very much resembles a natural monopoly. And so in such markets, governed by increasing returns to scale, there is no room for 2 or 3 dominant companies. It's a race with only one winner. You either win the race thanks to superior increasing returns to scale, or you lose and you're evicted of the market and you're seen as an also round. And so it's very much like an election. Again, if you win, you're president. If you lose, you're bound to be a footnote in history books, as the saying goes. And so it all explains why tech entrepreneurs and the managers that work with them act like activists. It's because they know they have to win this thing, otherwise there won't be room for them on the market. Again, there's only room for one GM on the market. There's no room for a Ford or a Chrysler right behind a GM. That's the nature of digital markets. However, there are limits to that kind of activism. And what's interesting is that those limits are set up by the individuals using applications themselves. So I have 2 examples which will sound very familiar to you. First is Uber. Uber is a company that has been an activist company pursuing the cause of convenient end-to-end transportation in cities. But on the way to pursuing that mission, they encountered a lot of problems. And at some point, the customers of Uber decided that they didn't like the way the company treated women, and they didn't like the way the company treated drivers on their platform. And so the company started losing trust of their own customers. And so they had to revise the way they acted as activists, including by replacing their CEO. Another example is Facebook. So Facebook is an activist company that promotes the cause of making the world more open and more connected, which is a noble cause. But along the way, they encountered problems, and they discovered that their model led them to enable companies such as Cambridge Analytica to distort public discourse and to corrupt democracy. And so they had to they're in the process of making a lot of change, and in the meantime, they very much look like an endangered company. So this is the broad picture that I'd like to share today with you. Today's entrepreneurs need to be activists, but that activism encounters limits that are brought forward by the users themselves. And so I have just one slide, one graphic that I'd like to share with you. I hope it works. It's extracted from my book, Hedge, that was published earlier this year, and it's about explaining what's a tech company and how important the trust of users is in operating a tech company today. So it all starts with an exceptional experience. That's how you attract users in today's economy. That exceptional experience in turn generates trust and engagement from the user's part. And engagement and trust make it possible to harvest, to collect data at a very large scale, to operate what I call regular and systematic monitoring of user activity, which makes it possible to generate network effects, to operate machine learning algorithms, which in turn leads to increasing returns to scale. That is an economic surplus that in turn can be reinvested into improving the quality of the experience. It's all a feedback loop. And that is very much what is at stake today on digital markets. And I hope it helps you understand how activism is important, but how trust is as important as activism today. So activism, in conclusion, has become the playbook for growing successful tech companies today. Some people say politics is dead. What I found is that it lives on in the entrepreneurial world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the tech giants are the activists, but it's about getting the right sort of activism, I guess. And to name check the name of the conference, if anything went wrong at Facebook, it seems the machines were fine. Actually, it was the human dimension in this instance is why Facebook has gone off course.
Yes, absolutely. And that's because you need to remember that you're an activist, but it's ultimately about serving your users with that exceptional experience I was mentioning. If that experience turns to be mixed, not that exceptional, or generate add negative externalities, then you have to correct course. But it demands a lot of sensitivity to the market, which apparently they didn't have.
Okay, thank you. And our final speaker, Peter, with a view from the boardroom.
Yeah, thank you, James. It's great to be here, and I feel very privileged to sit here with professors I've read 35 years ago and had to learn by heart, so I'm not sure I can add anything to what you said. I mean, should managers be activists? I think the answer is very simple, and that's always the best answer. If you don't have one, you say it depends. And as Henry already said, Milton Friedman says the business of business is business. And that was when shareholder value was the only game in town. And fortunately, we've overcome this development. And of course, every company, every CEO, every board has a wide obligation because we influence society. So if I say it depends, I mean, I want to cluster it into the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think it is good to be an activist if this represents really what your company does or what the values of your company are. So for instance, in my case, Mondi, a packaging and paper company, we are leading in the fight to reduce plastics in packaging. And so if I am outspoken or if our company is outspoken on that subject, that's obviously good. If we say we've reduced our CO2 emissions, we speak out in that sense, and you named that social responsibility, I think it's also good. So in this way, I'm very much supportive of being an activist. Now, in speaking out, and I will come to a few other aspects. The bad is, and that has to do more with the egos of many CEOs, to talk about daily political things. So obviously you feel flattered because you're asked by journalists what you think about Brexit, about Trump, about the latest increase in interest rate from ECB on this and that, the newest political decision which was taken. And I think it's a bad habit to speak about it. And there is research which clearly shows that and the question is why. It is because you have no mandate from your company. So you have to keep your ego under control because it's not about you, it's about your company. And if you speak out in favor or against Trump or Brexit or whatever it might be, first, there are probably 50% or so of your employees who say, I mean, what he's talking about, that's not the position of the company. Like Mondi, it's his personal thinking. Customers are thinking about it. And there was a field test done which showed that CEOs who strongly speak out lose market share because those who agree with them, so to say, don't buy more, but many feel offended and say, why does he say that or she say this or that? And then there is the ugly. And the ugly is obviously lobbying behind the scenes and in secrecy. Now, there is then the aspect is what do some companies want to do? So they say, and I heard that a bit from Phil, so states have no money and shouldn't companies take over? And I think there is some truth in it because we believe that a company has responsibility, but we also have to be aware about some risks. So I recently heard a CEO of a very big multinational, and he said, look, bashing of governments, these guys don't understand it, they are too far away from reality, so I as a CEO, we as a company, we will sort out a lot of things. Because we are global, the others, they are just thinking in their small world of nationalities, so we as a company, we solve the problems. Now, as a Democrat, I'm a bit worried about. So is this company and is their management deciding what, in this case, digital environmental policies are to be done? Or in different words, I think it's very good that Mondi fights plastic in packaging, but I would not want a world where Mondi writes a law how that should be changed. So we have democratically elected bodies, and they have to stand up. For instance, it is up to a democratically elected parliament to say, for every ton of or kilogram of plastics you consume, you should pay a certain tax. It's not, it's beyond the reach, so to say, of companies to do it. The other thing is then that some companies are pushed to do more, and obviously there is also a limit to it because it must not become a fraud against the shareholders. So I give you an example. If we had let's say a gas energy system, and someone said you should install a solar system, which is better environmentally, and this solar system would cost twice as much, and I just spent, or our company spent 100 million building a solar system which costs even more money in running it, you have then certain boundaries because it's not the money of the board, it's not the money of the CEO, it's not the money of the company, we are only fiduciaries. So there are certain trade-offs. It's ideal you can be easily an activist if you do something which is overall in the interest of a company and of society, but sometimes you have demands and trade-offs where you have to find the right balance. And then I also wanted to touch on the subject of shareholder activism, because that plays very much into this as well. So shareholder activism, for those who are not so familiar with it, is a shareholder takes a 2 or 3% stake in your company and then says you should spin off your division, or you should slash your marketing costs or R&D, or whatever they will say. And again, there is the good, the bad, and the ugly. Historically, it was founded I think it came up in the 90s, when you had complacent boards, old boys networks, who just had their corporate jet, their easy life, and these people came in and they woke them up, and I think that's very legitimate. Now, we come to the bad, or actually, what has happened then was actually that a lot of corporate governance reform took place. So you have, like today in the UK, you can't be on the board for more than 9 years. The chairman and the CEO must be different people, different to the US, and I think that's a serious problem in the US. You have different chairs of various committees who must not be the chairman of the board to have a sort of balance of power. You have an independent director, and so on and so on. So you would expect that shareholder activism has become less, but actually it has become more, and it's now coming to Europe. So it was a big issue in the US, a very rare issue in Europe. Now it's getting very big. And I know a number of companies, because they are our suppliers, our customers, or I know them by other ways and means, and there it is very much about short-termism. So sell this underperforming unit, but not because it's bad, but you build something up. So if a company and if a board comes to the conclusion, we want to develop something at the expense of short-term profit, because we invest in R&D, we build something up, I ask myself, is it fair that a 2 or 3% shareholder can actually change it all? And the big problem we have today, in the cases I know, is that you have a silent majority shareholder base who do not necessarily support it, but on the other hand, they lean back and say, if this pushes up the share price by 6%, okay, long term it's not the best, but then I sell the shares and buy something else. And that's a dilemma I don't know how to solve. And then obviously you have the ugly things where this activist shareholder work together with a private equity group who would maybe like to buy this division, and other things. So in a nutshell, unfortunately I don't have the easy answer. It's not yes or no. I think a company and a CEO has to be very thoughtful and selective on which subjects There is really a company position where you should take a position, and on all other subjects, shut up because no one is an expert in everything, and you should not you should not feel your employees and your customers, so to say, being one-sided, especially if it's about party politics.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Thank you for speaking out today, despite saying that it's good for CEOs not to speak out.
Yeah.
On the point of corporate activism, given that this is something that's come from the States into the UK, you as a CEO of a big company, do you run your company differently, given the sense that at any time there could be a shareholder who pops up on Twitter and says, do this or do that? I mean, or do you have, is it constantly that balance between the short-term delivery and then the long-term sort of value, purpose, and so on?
Yeah. I mean, we've taken the position that we thought through what they could say or could do, but we say we as a board are at the end of the day responsible to do the best, what we think is the best for the company in the long term, and we do it, full stop.
Okay. Henry, I'll come back to you. Some of the questions on Slido talk about...
Ask me first without the mic, because the acoustics are hard.
Okay, I'll do it.
So, some people asked on Slido about if the problem is the big monopolies like Google or Facebook, then why don't governments just break up the monopolies, as they did with Standard Oil all those years ago?
So the question was whether if the problem of companies overreaching themselves is the likes of Facebook and Google, why aren't governments more active in trying to break up those monopolies?
Let me give you a hint, because Teddy Roosevelt is not the president of the United States. I mean, the people who broke up the trusts had the guts to do it and to challenge it. But the relationship today between big business and government is so tight in some countries, many countries, that it's not going to happen. And on the global scale, there is no... Galbraith referred to, a Canadian economist, referred to countervailing power. That when one institution gets power, like big business, in the United States when he wrote, unions got power to challenge business. Well, there's no countervailing power in the global arena. In fact, the UN is weak, and all the major powerful agencies are cheerleaders for globalization. They're all economic. So globalization has a free rein, which, you know, manifests itself in trade pacts, where you have these phony tribunals that enable companies to sue governments for any legislation that gets in the way of their profits. I mean, it's out of control. I don't know how many people realize how far out of control it is right now. I'm a fan of business. I love business. I love the products and services I get from good companies. But the power relationship for too many companies, certainly not all, is out of control.
So if the institutions are too weak, then how do you pull those two sides apart?
So if the institutions are too weak, then how do you pull business and society back apart?
Well, I mean, that's a major question, but I'll sort of broach that a little bit tomorrow. But to me, there's this challenge between two sectors, public and private, has led to pendulum politics. We swing back and forth between left and right, and meanwhile, government gets paralyzed and business proceeds and does what it likes, which if I was running a business, I would do what I like too. But there's a third sector in society that's required for balance. I call it the plural sector or civil society, and it means that communities and people have to wake up and start to act. And it's not just marching, it's marching with teeth. In other words, it's if the kids in Florida were angry about assault rifles, they should have surrounded Congress with 1 million kids and say, we're not leaving until you do this. It's the only way that it's going to change.
Philip, I was going to ask you, is there ever a circumstance you think where big business, where corporations, in pursuing this sort of social activist agenda, can take the role of government?
Well, can I answer a different question?
Well, you haven't answered any of mine yet, so please, as you wish.
I like to be consistent. Because I'm taking with Henry's position because we are a little at the opposite end of things. And I say there should be more activism and social activism, and he says there's excessive. It's going to get excessive. It's going to take you away from running your business. I think capitalism is on the way to destroying itself unless it starts taking some responsibility for the state of the society. I personally think that the answer comes from Nordic capitalism. Nordic capitalism is the ideas you find in Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway, and so on. Namely, there's no reason as a society should not make college education free, should have anyone who gets a medical bill taken care of for the society, Medicare for all. And it seems to me that the 1% curse is a curse. That somehow we're relying on the robber barons to take care of things because if they make their money, they will give back a lot. Carnegie builds a corporation, Rockefeller builds a corporation. Better than depending on robber barons, I would rather find some solution to running a society that is run with what is called the common good. Recently, Robert Reich wrote a book on the common good, and my book is coming out on the common good. I always judge something about, does it really do good for most people? If it does good for a clique, it's not good. I go back to the philosophers of the common good, and there's a way in which even economists think about it. Namely, there's some policy sometimes that will hurt some people, but it may be a good policy for the common good. And the economists say if those who benefited from this policy, if they can compensate those who've been hurt, and on net, it's progress, that's fine. So the way I think about the philosophy of Jeremy Bentham, which was the idea of always asking, is the policy a good one for the common good? It's always too often good for a small group. And so Henry and I are probably on different sides of the issue.
We should have sat you at the opposite ends. Just want to ask you, Peter, the corporations are always permitted, if you like, by their shareholders to have social purpose and to engage and invest in society, if you like, but as long as the profits carry on. So we're kind of at the end of that 10-year bull run now on the Dow. If companies haven't got it right yet, then the chances are they're not going to get it right in the next few years when things get harder, are they?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, if a company is doing well, then everyone feels happy and they say, go on. But I think at the end, it's the courage of management and the board to say, we have a brand, we stand for something. That is important for our customers, that's important for our employees, and we carry through even if it means that our profits are short-term lower, but it's a risk. But I always think, being CEO is anyhow risky, so take the risk. You should do what is right, or what you think is right, because sometimes one is wrong, but at least one should try hard to do the right thing. And if other people think at a certain point in time, no, that was wrong, or that's too long-term thinking, or whatever, you're wasting money, then they have the chance in UK every year to vote you down.
Emmanuelle, do you agree it's a risk? I mean, I think, as you said, it's a risk that managers have to take.
Yes, I think I believe in business. I believe in companies. I'm not sure that you have just to add something on Henri. I'm not sure you have the three sectors: public, private, and civil society. Because civil society is inside companies too, and maybe we can leverage on company to change the world. in the context of political decay. So yes, I believe in business, I believe in companies, I believe in management, and I believe in leadership. And I think the main challenge nowadays is for managers and for leaders to take their responsibility. Activist companies and activist world needs activist leaders and activist investors. Because it's not only the question of the CEO, it's a question of the investors too. And so we need people to take their responsibility and to make things change inside society. And I'm convinced that we can be, we have a kind of beacon on this subject, because companies are changing, and it's not for me only a question of Nordic companies. I can take two examples. Michelin, for instance, today is a favorite employer of American millennials. And you know why? Because from the very beginning, this company puts the human capital at the heart of the performance system, the global system, the social system. And today it makes a difference for clients and for talents. I can take another example. It's Yves Rocher, a natural cosmetic company. 70 years ago, Yves Rocher launched his business. Nowadays, it's a business of 18,000 people. And at the heart of his entrepreneurial project was a political project to make the difference and to create an ecosystem linking together workers, farmers, citizens, employees, the environment, a real society. And nowadays, if you go to La Gacilly in Brittany, in France, you can see what corporate activism could do for good. It's not social or profitable. It's all together.
Okay. Nicolas, given your experience with startups, is it easier, do you think, to be a managerial activist if you're a private company before you brought the external shareholders in? And then if so, how do you sort of take that ambition and that culture forward?
Well, apparently, if you consider the previous generations of tech companies, it's much easier to be agile and innovative if you're a private company, because on the other hand, there are a few large tech companies that are public companies that have been public companies for a long time. And I think what really made the difference in terms of activism and being able to innovate on a continuous basis is the fact that those companies are still led by their founder, like is the case at Amazon. And a very strong balance of power has been established between the company and its shareholders, usually on behalf of customers. I find Amazon a very interesting case because you hear Jeff Bezos constantly explaining that it's all about the customer, that Amazon wants to be the most customer-centric company in the world. And that's because he knows that those customers are so empowered by computing and networks that he really has to provide them with the best experience possible, with the lowest price possible, with a seamless experience through the many applications operated by Amazon. And he wouldn't be able to do that if he had to pay large dividends to the shareholders but what's interesting is that he made that point early on when Amazon went public. That was in '97, so a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And he's been relentless in reminding shareholders every year that it's not about them, it's about the customers. Mm-hmm. And that balance of power between the different parties in the corporation has made it possible for Bezos to remain an activist on behalf of his customers.
Okay, thank you. I mean, Philip, Jeff Bezos often comes into this kind of debate. Is he your idea of a good activist?
I'm waiting for him to become a better one. He's the richest man in the world, and I think he will become a better one. But the guy has opened up such new avenues of thought and practice that I just have to admire what he's done, regardless of what he does socially later on.
Peter, I'll come to you. Is it in terms of getting the idea of activism going within the company and engaging all the stakeholders. Is it much easier to do if you've got a burning platform, if you like, if you're sort of saying, you know, the company needs change, the company needs to do better? Is it almost better if you've done badly in the past, if you've been one of the CSI people, rather than the CSR people?
I don't know so well, because we are doing well, Pers. Have been doing well. I would guess it's a bit more difficult. I mean, there are always these the cases where what you do as an activist in this term is good for the business, and where you have like you have a burning platform, you have to get a clearer brand, etc., and so you can make internally bigger changes. So in this way, it's easier. But if there are trade-offs, can we afford to do good things which are bad for our short-term or medium-term profitability? I think the better you're doing, the more you can do in this respect. So it depends.
Henry, how do you... shall I do it without?
No, let's try it. Yeah.
So how do you... one question on Slido. How do you redesign the economic system?
How do you
redesign the economic system?
digitize? How do you digitize?
How do you redesign
the economic
system so that the social and environmental
Well, I don't. How do you redesign the economic system? I think it's the wrong way to put it. How do you redesign the social system? Because the problem to me is if we have economic, social, and political forces in society, the economic forces dominate. And the model from economics that greed is good and markets are sacrosanct and governments are suspect is part of the problem. What we need, I'll keep saying it till somebody listens, but what we need is balance across the social, the economic, and the political. I wouldn't call it Scandinavian capitalism. I'd call it Nordic capitalism. I'd call it Nordic balance. Okay, the Nordic countries are balanced, and that encourages the companies to be balanced. So many of the major Danish companies are controlled by foundations and are not beholden to short-term stock market nonsense. And the reason I'm so keen on the word plural is because if we say public-private civil society, it's a different animal. If we say public-private plural, we start to wake up to the fact that it's an equal partner, and the plural sector is the community sector. And the way we deal with these economic forces, I keep coming back to the same thing, is that all the sectors have to work together in cooperation. Right now, it seems to me they work against each other to two great. Sometimes they work cooperatively, often they work competitively. You know, business lobbies government, government tries to control the population challenges businesses. That's not the way to work. You want to go the other way, where they encourage each other and work with each other. But that has to start in the plural sector, because government is not going to give up the power that it's gained. Most, the big companies, Google is not exactly lying down and dying because the European Union is challenging Google. It's never going to do that. Uber is not going to say, geez, I'm sorry, mea culpa, we were really bad. They're doing some of that, but it's phony. Okay? What Uber does is march in and say, the hell with your regulations. We're taking over the taxi business. And governments are falling dead left and right in order to drive their taxi drivers down to minimum wages. So this is happening everywhere, and it's only going to change when the plural sector drives the public sector to wake up to what it has to do and what it's responsible for doing. Electing Donald Trump doesn't do it. So let me say something I want to say tomorrow, but let me say it again. Capitalism needs fixing, but fixing capitalism will no more fix society than fixing communism would have fixed the Eastern European societies. It's not about fixing capitalism. It's about fixing society.
I feel there's another panel coming on there on that topic. Philip, do you agree to disagree with that?
Both.
And
We're
would you
getting
elaborate?
somewhere.
I mean,
We're getting somewhere.
you know, you've said that we need brand activism so companies can engage with all of their stakeholders, but the companies have to approach it from an authentic point of view.
Was that for me?
Philip.
For Phil. Okay.
Would you repeat the question?
I'm saying that it's not just about, it's a sort of the type of activism that organizations go with, and I think you used the word authentic in your comments at the start. It's about how to make sure that it's not greenwash, that it actually works for all rather than just working for the shareholders.
Yeah. I think that every company will be constrained from excessive activism by its own board, if not by the top management. And so basically, we should admire companies that want to be more activist and not embarrass those who are not at all activist, because there may be good reasons to be neutral about activism, since the company doesn't want to take much risk and they rather not get caught up in that. So I'm much more Catholic about companies deciding, after hearing all of us, how active they want to be. And boards are going to be under more and more, they're going to show more interest in asking for some activism, I believe. And some boards that are very conservative will probably stop it from even happening. But I believe, contrary to Henry, there's been not much activism. He thinks we've already been having too much. I think the whole history of the country has been that there's been charities, but it wasn't the kind of activism I'm talking about.
Okay, great. Well, I'm conscious of the time. I know it's always very difficult being the last session of the day, so I hope we've been active sufficiently and also a little activist for you this afternoon. Just to say thank you to our speakers, Philip, Emmanuelle, Henry, Peter, and Nicolas. Thank you.